Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Writing poems put Gorman on the map, and in murals too, from her hometown in Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., the place where she plans to one day attend an inauguration of her own. You sit here today as a 23-year-old young woman, but as a young girl at 11, you said, I intend to run for president in 2036. I'm thinking at 11, I might have been still playing with Barbie. I was certainly doing puzzles.
Well, you should know 5 years ago I said I wanted to be the inaugural poet, and now we're here. So
you said that 5 years ago?
5 years ago. I think there's a type of spirit in me which feels if I'm not going to dream a dream for myself, who was going to? If not now, when? If not here, where? If not me, who? And so it's kind of that questioning of both myself and the world that gives me these ideas of how are the ways that I can continue to make change.
Hello, and welcome back to The Conversation Piece with your host, Akila.
When you look back over the course of the year, what has it been like for you?
Oh, that's such a good question, and it's also, I think, a really difficult one to answer. Most of the year, it felt like I was kind of shot out of a cannon and trying to fly high.
I was wondering if you felt like you were on a rocket.
Yes,
I actually wondered that.
Absolutely, and I think one of the scary things about being on a rocket is you sometimes feel like the higher you climb, the harder you'll fall. And so for a lot of the year, it was, I think, also frightening and terrifying of, could I live up to this expectation? Could I live up to this image and idea that people had kind of made of me?
As a kid, you felt like the weird kid in class, the outsider in class. Did you?
Yes, and I think I still feel that way.
You still feel that way?
Oh, all the time.
Did you see yourself on the red carpet at the Met Ball? When you walk in and they go, it's Amanda Gorman. Amanda, right here. You still feel that way?
Yes, I think there's like a little bit of that imposter syndrome because I'm such a nerd, such a geek, and be so gangly. And I think when I was growing up, you know, I wasn't just kind of a really brainy kid. I was a really black kid. I was a really skinny kid. I was a really small kid. And also a kid whose voice was kind of distorted by a speech impediment. So all of these things kind of made me feel as othered or too different, you might say. And so, yeah, it really made me feel sometimes on the outside looking in. And I think nowadays with more age behind me, I look back at it and I am so grateful for that experience because all the things that make me different make me who I am, and they make me great.
Imagine, picture if you will, a young petite black girl who loves Star Trek, can walk on her hands, who battled with a speech impediment and used poetry as a way to overcome. She has a talent for the written word. At the tender age of 20, she is asked to write and then recite her poem in front of millions of people. The world is watching, and the incoming, soon-to-be sworn-in President of the United States is a stone throws away, listening to her every word. Everyone is listening to her every word. We are all witnesses, and after she's done, her words are so moving, so thought-provoking and emotional that they were described as significant, tour de force, star turn, forever spiritual to sing, a poetic battle cry. To have your delivery compared to the great Maya Angelou. She is the youngest person to this day to recite an inaugural poem, and then to see her work in a few other books, restricted by a Florida mom who admitted that she only read parts of the material. Parts. Being a writer is about observation. It's about creation. It's about imagination. It's about communication. It's about perception, a lived experience. As a listener, you have to listen and comprehend what's being said and how it's said and the tone in which the message is being communicated. It matters because essentially you can affect people. You can be engaging or you can make people want to tune out. As a reader, it's about comprehension. Did you understand what you just read? What we consume through reading, whether at our leisure or in a classroom, depending on the subject matter, is of great importance. And again, the perception of the lived experience of the author will matter. Did you learn a new perspective? Did it confirm or reject a bias you may or may not have held? Did it challenge you to think? Did it prompt you to seek out more information? Reading a book is not an endorsement of the subject matter. Reading is about acquiring knowledge. Reading, writing, and listening are all connected. Studies suggest that a little over half of Americans have finished a book in its entirety in a yearly span. Now, I'm not gonna lie. I'm still working my way through Barack Obama's A Promised Land. That book is thick, y'all, and we all know the former president can be wordy and long-winded. No shade. But there are people in today's society who do not read material in their entirety for comprehension and context anymore, especially those who have an agenda, if they read the material at all. In these purposely divided political times, a word or phrase might trigger someone, and their fingers are already on the share send button. Or someone has to give their hot take opinion on matters and subjects they have not even read up on.
You are now listening to the Conversation Piece Podcast.
So let's talk about this case in Florida, and let's put it in context. It was one parent in one school brought this up, and it's our understanding that it was reported, Amanda, she didn't even read the book. She reported that Oprah Winfrey had written the book. We also know that that isn't true, and that she didn't think it was suitable for elementary school students. What was your initial reaction when you heard? What are your thoughts?
My initial reaction was a mix of shock and sadness at the same time. One, because I couldn't understand a reason for rendering this piece as inappropriate for elementary school students. And also because when I wrote The Hill We Climb, it was so important for me that young people would see themselves represented in a significant moment in our democratic history, and that the reality of that in that moment would be erased for young people who deserve to see themselves at a place and station like that. That was just really disappointing.
In the case of Daily Salinas, the Florida mom who filed a complaint about Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb, which was eventually published as a book, according to documents obtained by the Florida Freedom to Read Project, Oprah was listed as the author of the poem. I'm not kidding. Gorman has the receipts. In one of her tweets, she has a copy of the complaint. Oprah Winfrey is spelled out plain as day as the author. Here's how the rest of the complaint reads. In the section, what would you like to do about this media? The options are leave the material, limit the educational use, remove the challenge material. Remove the challenge material was checked. The section titled, To What Do You Object? Blank. Not a word written. It was left blank, which leaves those of us who know how to use critical thinking skills, then what is this about? The section of Why Do You Object to this material? The complainant stated that, quote, it's not educational, page 12 to 13. Now, check this out. This section, did you review all the material? Yes. Next question. Are you aware of professional reviews of this material? The complainant wrote with her own words, quote, I don't need it. Next question. For what age group would you recommend this material? The complainant wrote, quote, not for schools. Next question. What do you believe is the function of this material? The complainant wrote, quote, cause confusion and indoctrinate students. Amanda clapped back. She tweeted, quote, so they banned my book from young readers, confused me with Oprah, failed to specify what parts of my poetry they object to, refuse to read any reviews, and offer no alternatives. End quote. Really now?
But Amanda, let's talk about the terminology a bit more, because this all comes under the rubric of banned books. People on the left use that term. You were at a banned book event. And I think people on the right say, look, these books are still available at every bookstore, your book, your words, all over the internet. You can go to public libraries and get them. And this is really, it's just a modest concession to parents who want some control over the intellectual, religious, and political development of their kids. So is banned really a word that you want to be using here?
Absolutely. I think I'm so grateful that you brought up this question, because there's a huge loophole that exists where we expect if a book isn't being burned behind a school or thrown away, that's not a ban. But what happens is removal and restriction, I guess, would be even more accurate terms. For example, in the case of my book and the 3 other books that were banned from Bob Graham Education Center, you will be told that it hasn't been banned, but it has been moved from elementary school shelves to a media center. Students now need to specifically request for those books in order to see them, and they can't read them until they prove to a media specialist that they have the correct reading level for those books. And so I think we have to broaden our understanding of the restriction and the removal that's going on. And just because a book is still technically in circulation doesn't necessarily mean that the access to that book has been preserved. If anything, we're seeing a lot of rolling back of that access.
Hey you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Do you have Spotify? If so, turn on the notification button. In regard to the material, Salinas informed the Jewish Telegraphic Agency that the poem and books did not fit the curriculum. That said curriculum is part of the multiple laws that went into effect in Florida about how race and gender can be discussed in schools, which sets in motion a dangerous precedent. As Selena stated, quote, "I'm not an expert. I'm not a reader. I'm not a book person. I'm a mom involved in my children's education," end quote. Now, why did I mention the Jewish Telegraphic Agency? Oh, because Salinas had to issue an apology because of a post she shared, a post she did not read in its entirety. She simply saw the word communism. She reportedly stated this, quote, "I want to apologize to the Jewish community. I am not what the post says. I love the Jewish community," end quote. Now, the irony of this is that Salinas has been linked to a couple of far-right fringe groups, one in particular who had a presence in the January 6th insurrection, the Proud Boys. Salinas, of course, denies these allegations, but pictures show otherwise. The irony, of course, is that the rhetoric the Proud Boy uses and the, quote, hateful messages she supposedly objects to in the school curriculum that she admits to not have read fully could easily call into question her true motives, but I'm not here to discuss her. It's not so much what people do anymore, it's also about what they say and how they say it. We are living in a cynical world of dog whistle politics. You don't have to be right anymore. You don't even have to make any logical sense. You just have to be loud over and over and over again. And if you can somehow get a politician who shares your views, who has financial backing, who also shares their views, well, you can cause a lot of chaos and confusion. The state of Florida has yet again found itself in another controversy surrounding the new Black history teaching standards, in which they want to teach the narrative that slavery was beneficial to the enslaved people because it helped them develop skills.
Do not, for the love of God, tell kids that slavery was beneficial, because I guarantee you it most certainly was not.
Education and civil rights advocates are slamming new Black history teaching standards in Florida. Under the new rules, middle school teachers must now include lessons, quote, how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. CNN's Athena Jones is here on this. These changes are incredibly controversial, obviously, but they're also not correct.
Right, it's inaccurate, it's ahistorical. Critics are calling this a big step backwards and saying it's a disservice to Florida students because they're not going to learn the full truth and the full accurate truth of American history. And this is, of course, the latest development in ongoing debates over how to teach kids about Black history. You mentioned one of the most shocking examples for middle school students saying that slavery was beneficial. It's an odd thing to say about a group whose labor went uncompensated for generation upon generation. Here are some of the other examples we have. One of them is the teaching of the Ocoee Massacre. Teachers are required to mention acts of violence perpetrated by African Americans. Similar standards are applied to other massacres, the Tulsa Massacre, the Atlanta Race Riot, Rosewood Massacre. And I want to be clear here, these are all cases of violent armed mobs of white people attacking Black Americans. And yet these standards say you have to talk about acts of violence perpetrated by Blacks. They're also not required to teach African-American history past Reconstruction to elementary and middle school students. And they omit the fact that Florida in 1957, the legislature passed a resolution opposing the Brown v. Board, a landmark decision by the Supreme Court that ended legal segregation in public education. So these are standards that critics say just aren't going to be teaching the children of Florida, one of the largest states, the third largest state, the proper history, and it won't prepare them well for the future.
They are creating these unnecessary debates. This is unnecessary to debate whether enslaved people benefited from slavery. Are you kidding me? Are we supposed to debate that? Let us not be distracted by what they're trying to do, which is to create unnecessary debates to divide our country. Let's not fall in that trap.
Yeah, what was the benefit of forced breeding, of raping enslaved women and then owning their children as a breeding strategy and also just as a form of venality? What was the benefit of taking Black enslaved children and putting them by the water so that gators could come, so that they could hunt gators, and using them as literal gator bait, and then putting that on postcards? That is the savagery that took place.
We have the potential right now to raise a generation of children who don't know who they are, who don't know where they come from, and who do not know their history.
After the break, the motive behind banning material, and later, I will attempt to break down Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, from my perspective and understanding. Whew, that's going to be a hill, all right. Amanda is a Harvard graduate, is the youngest inaugural poet, and has 3 books out. I have a humble podcast, I've been published twice, and I have an annoying cat. But I'm not comparing. No, seriously, I am nowhere near her level.
When I think about you, I think that I admire and I celebrate your confidence. But I also read that you said, I'm still trying to figure out who Amanda Gorman is. How does one figure out who they are?
That's a great
especially
question.
if they're you.
Yes. I remember this was several years ago, and I saw kind of a sign as I was walking kind of down a hallway that was, life isn't about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. And so if I throw away this idea that there's going to be a kind of singular destination in which I arrive at myself, but rather that it's more so of a journey, it's more so of a climb, then that's the type of voyage that I can kind of invest myself in.
You are now listening to the Conversation Piece podcast.
On May 23rd, 2023, Amanda tweeted this, quote, I'm gutted. Because of one parent's complaint, my inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb, has been banned from an elementary school in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Book bans aren't new, but they have been on the rise according to the ALA, 40% more books were challenged in 2022 compared to 2021. What's more, often all it takes to remove these works from our libraries and schools is a single objection. And let's be clear, most of the forbidden works are authors who have struggled for generations to get on bookshelves. The majority of these censored works are by queer and non-white voices. I wrote The Hill We Climb so that all young people could see themselves in a historical moment. Ever since, I received countless letters and voices from children inspired by The Hill We Climb to write their own poems. Robbing children of the chance to find their voices in literature is a violation of their right to free thought and free speech. What can we do? We must speak out and have our voices heard. Together, this is the hill we won't just climb, but a hill we will conquer." End quote. Since 2020, according to the American Library Association, some of the reasons behind book bans deal with sexual content, offensive language, inappropriate age material, religion, LGBTQIA+ content, violence, racism, drug use, political leanings, and anti-family material. Some of these reasons are understandable, and I am in favor of having age-appropriate material taught in school in the right class environment. But there will be times where kids ask questions. That is what kids do. They're curious. And I understand parents wanting to discuss certain matters with their children, but there are some parents who leave their children's education up to teachers. And teachers have enough pressure on them already. They shouldn't have to feel worried that their job is now in jeopardy if a parent has a feeling that their child is being taught inappropriate material. But parents, politicians, activists, and school board officials are challenging books at a record pace, unlike any time in decades. And in some cases, some people want criminal charges pressed against librarians and teachers. But many libraries and schools already have systems in place to stop students from checking out inappropriate material parents might already object to.
Well, Amanda, what about the parents' role in all this? Because that's what's driving it on the right. A lot of parent anxiety that they've lost control of what's going in their child's brain at school every day. What balance do you believe should be struck between a parent's right to guard and inform their child as they see fit and the school's duty to expose the child to all sorts of intellectual material?
What I think is important to really absorb is there were thousands of books that were banned last year, over 2,500. And according to the Washington Post, the majority of those filed complaints were by 11 people. And what that underscores for me is with how the structure works in our schools and libraries with laws that have been passed. All it takes is one person, one quickly written complaint to render that book inaccessible for everyone else in that community. And so I see it less as an issue between parents and schools because when you think about it, every parent has the right to make decisions about what their child can read. I'm fine with some parents not liking my poetry. That's completely in your right. But when we get to the situation where that one person dislike of my work leads to everyone else not having access to that, that is a huge issue, I think, because it encroaches on our freedom to really absorb and love and enjoy literature from where we are.
Speaking of the exposure of ideas and concepts that perhaps young children will be exposed to through your book, The Hill We Climb, or the ABCs of Black History, Love to Langston, what's your understanding of what people find inappropriate in those books?
So if you look at the research, the majority of books that have been banned fall into two camps. Either they have characters of color or talk about race in some way, or they have characters that are of the LGBTQ community or touch upon those themes in some way. And I have to think about what messaging that sends to young readers. It's as if you're saying, you are inappropriate if you're African American. You are inappropriate if you are gay. You are inappropriate if you are an immigrant. And there's this huge argument that it's about protecting and sheltering our children from themes that are just too advanced from them. But when you look at the majority of the books that have actually been banned, it's more about creating a bookshelf that doesn't represent the diverse facets of America.
Whoever would overthrow the library of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. Benjamin Franklin. Book bans wind up hurting students the most. America is becoming a more diverse country year after year. And despite a particular political ideology that would have you believe that this will impact the country negatively, it's the opposite. Having diverse viewpoints explored and respected only serves the country as a collective positively. It has to, if this country expects to compete and thrive in the coming decades. Up next, the hill we climb. Somebody once asked Warren Buffett about his secret to success. He pointed to a stack of books and said, "Read 500 pages like this every day. That's how knowledge works. It builds up, like compound interest. All of you can do it, but I guarantee not many of you will." Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. The poem in its entirety comes in under 6 minutes, but I broke it down into 4 parts as best as I could. Again, poetry to me is subjective in nature, but the author still wants to communicate a message across as best as they can. Amanda has described The Hill We Climb as a message of unity and collaboration and togetherness. She stated that parts were written after the 2020 presidential election and on the night of the January 6th insurrection. But regardless of the criticism of her work, The Hill We Climb serves as a metaphor that this country, and by extension the world, are still a work in progress.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
When day comes, day is synonymous with clarity and reason. Where we can find light, light is associated with knowledge, wisdom, and again, reason. The loss we carry. Perhaps we as a country, as a people, as humanity, we have lost a sense of reason, our sense of purpose, as we are trying to find clarity. We've braved the belly of the beast. Belly of the beast has broad meaning, perhaps even a spiritual meaning, as Prophet Jonah found himself in the belly of a whale or a large sea creature. But belly of the beast can mean finding yourself in a bad situation. The norms and notion of what just isn't always justice. I love the wordplay and juxtaposition between the words just is and justice. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. She's recalling the historical memory of America, in which we boast to other countries how we're a shining beacon on a hill, we're a free society. Even as we're trying to stabilize and live out that creed, we're still a country trying to move towards progress.
And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried. That we'll forever be tied together, victorious. Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. My immediate thought of this are the often repeated words etched into the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. And so we lift our gaze, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. Now, my breakdown was how the words between, before, close, first, aside, all deal with proximity and space. And sometimes space between people can be comforting or unsettling. She's daring us to put aside what we think separates us as people and to shift our focus up and towards the future. And the only way to do that is together as a unifying collective towards meaningful progress. We lay down our arms and reach out our arms. Pretty much he's saying, put the weapons down, people. Give a hug, damn it. That even as we grieved, we grew. Even as we hurt, we hoped. As we tired, we tried. Not because we will never again know defeat. We will never again sow division. Again, she's describing the historical nature of this country as battle-tested through physical, emotional descriptions. We have been attacked as a nation by other countries. There was Pearl Harbor, there was 9/11 being the most infamous instances. And what did we do? We rallied around each other as citizens, as a country, to support and help heal each other. We attack ourselves through domestic terrorism. Each affected community rally and support each other. Sowing division. The way I interpreted this because I see things through a historical lens. We don't like it when other countries try and divide us, portray us in a certain light. But then we as Americans, well, those of us who have an agenda, participate in divide and conquer tactics quite often. There's a lot of profit to be made in dividing people, unfortunately.
Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
Everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. That is a biblical reference. Micah 4:4. But earlier in the poem, Gorman mentions belly of the beast, laying down arms, sowing division. Micah's prayer was for peace. In this section, Gorman is hoping that we as a country will put down the weapon and pick up the banner of peace. If we're to live up to our time, the victory won't lie in a blade, but in all the bridges we've made. Again, a call to peace and unity. That part about because being American is more than a pride we inherit, it's the past we step into and how we repair it. That's deep, because we as Americans love to boast to the world about our superiority, but in reality, and keeping it 100, historically that is military superiority. No other country on earth spends as much money as we do on our military. America spends more money than the next 10 countries combined. Now, to be fair, we also give foreign aid to other countries as well. What I'm interpreting her words to mean is, what notion do we want to live up to? Where do we want our pride to reside in? Niccolo Machiavelli states it best. Is it better to be feared or loved? We've seen a force that would rather shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. Now, if you were alive during January 6, 2021, then you know exactly what this is stating. And if you believe that those were tourists that day, then I have nothing more to say to you.
This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
This is the era of just redemption. We feared it in its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter. I interpret this as the feeling of confusion, hopelessness, resolve, and eventually progression from the January 6th insurrection. For even in a period of that time, it seemed like time just stopped. But again, as a country, we pushed on. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised, but whole benevolence, but bold, fierce, and free. See, this is a flex. But again, she's reminding us that historically, we've been here before. We as a nation, we as a people, we have a tendency to beat up on one another, right? Then we chill out and relax a bit, right? Then we fight each other again. if we're not fighting someone else. Then we relax a bit. But we're still trying to move forward to a more perfect union. We know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. See, if my mom's generation or her mother's generation did not stand up, speak up, protest against societal ills such as racism, discrimination in education, housing, employment, what kind of society would we be living in right now? Each generation cannot sit idly by and do nothing if the goal of progression is to advance. Look at climate change. It is 1,000 degrees outside. But what generation will have to bear the brunt of the country's slow realization that climate change is a reality? Basically, we're not meant as a species to be inactive. Our physical bodies are meant for action. We're not meant for inaction. And then she goes, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. Bars. Bars. That is so beautiful and so true in like the simplest of terms. If we can just do right by each other, live by the golden rule, the blessings that come forth from those actions is change, and change for the better. And that is the inheritance we should want for the next generation, to live a more peaceful, progressive existence. Now, this is where the poem becomes a battle cry, a forever spiritual song to sing. She is summoning Americans from each corner and region of the nation and brings forward a challenge to each and every one of us. She goes, we will rise from the gold limb hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the middle western states. We will rise from the sun-baked south, and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge, battered and beautiful. Again, the imagery of how historically we as a country, we've been through so many fights, but yet again, we emerge, and we will not be beaten back. Then she circles back to the beginning. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? But then reminds us that we're resilient. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. And the ending is beautiful. For there was always light, if only we were brave enough to see it, if only we were brave enough to be it. We, on a subconscious level, we know what right and wrong is. Even the body knows. On a conscious level, when you're about to do something wrong, your body will tell on you. Your heart races, your breathing changes. On a conscious level, we know as a country, as a nation of people, the creed of what we project to other countries. USA, 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 right? What does that mean? What does that mean? We're in this world together, but isolating the country for a bit, America is battle tested. She's tired. If you could physically hear her speak, she'd probably be like, what is the matter with you? Y'all getting on my nerves. And she is getting her ass kicked right now via climate change. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mary Trump, but she said something the other day on the Michael Steele podcast, and I just had to share. She said, quote, I hate having to make this argument, but we have to engage people's self-interest. It is bad for you on a human level, on an economic level, on a socio-economic level, to allow other people in this society to fail, even if you hate them. End quote. So America, Americans, there's an African proverb that states, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We should have a vested interest in wanting to progress, to succeed, to be that shining beacon on a hill, to be a true example of American exceptionalism. Victory will taste that much sweeter if we did it together. side by side, with the next generation of children looking onward. And when they reminisce of the generations past, they will beam brightly and say, "Thank you."
You are now listening to the Conversation Piece Podcast.
Amanda Gorman has the last laugh as she has another book being released. I want to share her interview with Gayle King as a testimony as to why she is so special. And if I'm around in the year 2036, she has my vote.
So starting from that, where does your confidence come from today?
I think my confidence wasn't necessarily something that I taught myself, but something that was modeled for me. I was raised by a single mother, and I think the way in which she would walk through the space and kind of hold herself as a Black woman, that was a great type of kind of symbol for me to look at and go, this is how I can continue in this world.
She says her new book will serve as a record of the baggage and the blessings we've carried through this pandemic. Every cough seemed catastrophe. Every person a potential peril. We mapped each sneeze and sniffle. I thought, that's so true. I remember somebody sneezed and caught me like, oh, what was that? Certain the virus we had run away from was now running through us. What made you write that?
It was part of me trying to document, I think, the social, emotional reality of what a pandemic is. I can give you facts, I can give you numbers, I can give you deaths, but when you're walking through life afraid to breathe, afraid to be close and proximate to people, I think that does something to the body and to the soul.
There's no power like home. We are sick of home, homesick. The mask around our ear hung itself into the year.
I'm so honored that you like my wordplay or my
I do. Let's talk about your wordplay.
Yes.
And your process with that.
I think I really wanted to take certain phrases and turn them on their heads, not necessarily to kind of feel smart or pat myself on the back. But when you look at it, in many ways, we're really lacking language around how to grieve, how to be at loss. I wanted to create rhetoric that could more accurately represent our experience.
What is your process when you start to write a poem? Is there a certain thing?
Wow, I'm trying to think of my process, and it's really messy, and it can look like different things. And I think with the moments of turns of phrase in the book, it was less so me at my desk trying to write puns, but more so me walking through the world, walking down the street, seeing signs and really listening to people and hearing the words that we use to each other, about each other.
Here's a preview of the next episode. Okay, we're gonna get into You People. I don't like that movie, but
we gotta talk about You People.
Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Conversation Piece Podcast. I am your humble host, Akila, requesting that you join me again. So, until then, be safe, love, and value yourself so that you can love and value others. I bid you adieu with the greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.